He is really diving deep here after his experience at the comedy club. He is analyzing some things here more in depth. After he writes the passage, "The worst part about having a mental illness," he takes a drag of a cigarette. So this is a big reveal moment, spoiler here. He takes a drag of a cigarette, and he's writing with his right hand, and he writes, "The worst part about having a mental illness." And then, so he's writing this joke here, and then he takes a drag of his cigarette, and then he suddenly another personality reveals itself. When he suddenly champions an eccentric, playful persona, he switches to write with his left hand. So it's kind of like he kind of does one of these things. He's just kind of like, anyway. But then he actually switches hands, and then he ends up writing with his left hand. With his left hand, almost drunk on happiness and lust, this new person finishes the passage with, "People expect you to behave as if you don't." So the full joke is, the worst part about having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't. Wow, this writing and the execution of this film is extraordinary and on point. This exposes the possibility of multiple personality disorder. So very, very interesting and cool here. So, again, here we are mirroring Taxi Driver, where we see Arthur dive into analytical mode, engulfing himself in the comedy club scene, diving deep and really trying to figure out odd details in comedic performance to help understand what will be successful. Laughing at odd moments, he feels safe here, and his compulsion is accepted, even though it rests in many offbeat moments. Almost every single one of them is in a completely different place than everyone else is laughing, which is very interesting here too. But he still feels comfortable, which I think is an important part to recognize and point out and to really understand, is that he's feeling comfortable here. And so that does make me think about that too as well, that maybe there's comfort that he feels here in the comedy club, something that he may try to reproduce in the future. In The Killing Joke, there's some scenes where where he had kind of created a comedy club out of dead people or something, if I remember correctly. Forgive me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure what story that was, but I do remember the story being that where he was kind of trying to recreate a comedy club with corpses. A true artist will learn from others this way and then branch off into their own ideas by analysis. We are all capable of these ideas, and I have found that we discover them along the way through analysis. Analysis is merely a conduit or a vehicle to get you to the right headspace to discover your own talents. And that, my friend, is exactly what happens in this story. He discovers his own talents through analysis. He really applies himself. And of course, maybe skewed ways and skewed directions, but the point is that he does discover his talents through analysis, which is the right way to do things. This part of the story is much more streamlined and focused than with Taxi Driver as far as the analysis is concerned, because in Taxi Driver we have Bob De Niro's character seem to be wandering aimlessly, not sure of what he actually likes. He's not really sure of where he's going. He ends up analyzing himself and improving himself, but starts to dabble in the assassination school without any motive at all. Perhaps it was just because he was dumped by a woman who worked for the senator that he goes after. That part is extremely unclear and definitely unexplained, which definitely gives the film character. But I wouldn't have minded getting a little bit more insight as to why and I guess that's probably why he went after him, but it's just so weird. It's much more defined in this film. It's much more defined, his character, where he's driven for, what his goal is. His goal is to become a comedian. It's to succeed at becoming a comedian because he loves the idea of show business so much. He loves the idea of creating laughter in people, evoking some sort of emotional response in these people and making them feel good about themselves, feel good about maybe life or just everything. And so he definitely has a really big heart. That's an important factor here to discuss and understand, is that I think he does have he has a big heart, but maybe he loses grasp of that when he stops taking his medication. I'm not sure here, but one of the key factors here is that Arthur fades in and out of himself, enjoying it all along the way. And like I said before, he's kind of a passenger. He's kind of riding his own wave. He is really diving deep here after his experience at the comedy club. He is analyzing some things here more in depth. He takes a drag of a cigarette, and he's writing with his right hand. And he writes, the worst part about having a mental illness. And then, so he's writing this joke here, and then he takes a drag of his cigarette. When he suddenly champions an eccentric, playful persona, he switches to write with his left hand. So it's kind of like he kind of does one of these things. He's just kind of like... Anyway. But then he actually switches hands, and then he writes with he ends up writing with his left hand. With his left hand, almost drunk on happiness and lust, this new person finishes the passage with, people expect you to behave as if you don't. So the full joke is, the worst part about having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't. Wow, this writing and the execution of this film is extraordinary and on point. Sophie stops by and exposes Arthur's stalking her, and she is surprisingly welcoming to it. The flirting here is off the charts, and it's actually really fun. Joking about, I thought you were going to come and rob the place. I was hoping you'd come rob the place. It was kind of a really funny moment here, and his ability to reciprocate is great and surprising, because you don't get that from him. You don't. That's the thing, is that he is a wild card. He is unpredictable in that sense, is that you didn't know that he was going to be able to actually reciprocate and actually play off of her joke. But there lies in the other thing that ends up being shown later. So Arthur's compulsive laughter aids him in an involuntary chivalrous defense of a poor woman being harassed by 3 men on the train. After a hilarious yet sinister rendition of Send in the Clowns being used as an intimidation tactic, once again, here we are finding Arthur on the floor of a subway car being kicked while he is already down. After the surprising and exceptionally realistic retaliation, Arthur is forced to tie up a loose end, bouncing in and out of the subway car, playing a version of Chicken with the last perpetrator. So this moment did remind me of a movie, and I cannot remember what it was, but it's the, do I get on, do I get off the subway? Do I get on, do I get off the subway? And I want to think of The Matrix, but it's not that, it's something else. When the first shots are plunged into his victim execution style while he's on the ground, on the stairs, just begging for life, Arthur experiences tinnitus, perhaps from the loud bullets, and the attention to detail here is impressive and astounding. I was thoroughly impressed by that. Another reason why crime drama stories of this nature taking place in the 1980s are beneficial is because there are no cameras, no subway station cameras, no street cameras, and this makes it so much more possible for crazy, surprising criminal events to take place. So that's in and of itself is a great moment and commendable. I commend the writers for doing that, putting in the 80s, because nowadays there are so many cameras everywhere. It's that you have to have the cameras a part of the story. Cameras have to be a big part of the story. So it's like, oh, did you catch them on this camera? And I get it. That's a whole other thing. But it was nice, and once again, this makes it timeless, and we'll put it in a different class of movie because of that. You don't have these other obstructions, these other technological noise proponents, technological disturbances. As Arthur runs from the scene, he is frantic and terrified, realizing what he has done, and perhaps plagued with the endless possibilities and repercussions and consequences that he might have had to face after committing such an act. As he runs, we feel his terror with every step. We feel his need to get away, to escape at any cost. On his way to his safe hiding place, there are definitely some witnesses. The musical accompaniment is ethereal, non-committal, full of despair and ambiance.